So, this is one of those moments in my life that I just cherish, and that is being able to spend some quality time with my mentor, Dr. Stuart Brown, who's taught us here at Play Course so much about the science of play and why play is so important for humans and mammals. And this is just an honor. It's just an honor. It's great to be with you. It's just great to be with you. And hey, remember, we've got some really fresh content with a brand new publication that's free to the public, The Power of Play. Scott Eberly and Stuart Brown, authors. Lauren Sundstrom and Tony Christopher as the editors, and Bowen White, Dr. Bowen White and myself helped contribute some to that publication, and it's available.
Sure did.
It's available at the National Institute for Play, nifplay.org, and it's free to the public. So Stuart, just for everyone else who may be watching this someday, let's just talk a little bit about how did you get into play? Here you were, a renowned Southern California doctor with a practice and lots of stuff going on, and next thing you know, boom, the book comes out on play.
Well, let's start a little before that. I think the grounding I had in a family which was playful and which honored play without my necessarily knowing that was the way of life, gave me a grounding. And then, I went off to college and medical school and internship and residency, and finally had this moment when in August 1st, 1966, when I had finished my training in psychiatry, that a young man went up to the top of the Texas Tower, murdered his wife and mother beforehand, killed 14 people, and the governor of Texas and my boss at Baylor College of Medicine said, we want to figure out why this young man who was killed on the top of the tower through vigilante gunfire, why he did this. And I thought to myself, it's hard enough to understand behavior when you've got somebody alive trying to tell you about it. Here's a person who's no longer with us. What are we going to do? But some 16 weeks later, we had a commission that had been set aside by Governor Connolly of Texas and my boss, Sherwood Fraser. And sure enough, we had done 3 generations of history of Charles Whitman, the young man. We had looked at his family in detail. We'd done 35,000 brain sections, analysis of his brain. And the conclusion from the commission was that one of the major reasons he could not contain his violent impulses, which had been well hidden, was because he had never played.
Wow. Well, so why hadn't he ever played, Stuart?
He had a bipolar father who was sadistic and totally controlling, and here's this bright young, charming young, very, very intelligent young man who was completely under the thumb of his father, who at that time, this was pre-cell phone, had a phone nonetheless wired to him, his mother, his brothers, and controlled virtually every element of his life, including when he had should have had time normally to play, and he didn't have it.
Oh my goodness. So Charles Whitman never had time to go out and play as a child?
He never had the freedom to feel like his life was ever his own. He started having piano lessons forced on him when he was age 3 by his father. At the moment of his birth, his father was in the delivery room, and his father said, "Here comes the next president of the United States." So his father had that kind of total control over this young man. And so this was we felt this was the largest mass murder then in the United States, and we felt this was an aberration. It wasn't something you could generalize from. But then my boss got me a grant to study homicidal individuals in the state of Texas who are incarcerated in the Huntsville prison because of acts of homicide. So we studied 26 a pilot study of young murderers, matched them with 350 controls, and found that play histories were vastly different in the homicide as compared to those they were matched with. And that's what started me in the long quest, my long life quest for understanding more and more about play.
Well, the world is lucky that we have you and have the research that you've done and all of the materials that you've published and all of the speeches like your TED Talk and other keynotes that you've done over the years to talk about the importance of play. But what's really interesting is this whole concept that some people may never have even heard of, play deprivation. And, what exactly does that mean? And I go back to what you just said about Whitman and thinking about at the age of 3 being so controlled, when I remember Dr. Frost talking about our emotional health, and through free play, children get to start experiencing their own persona. Just fascinating. But what exactly is play deprivation?
Well, the play deprivation one saw in Whitman and in the murderers, and in a subsequent study of felony drunken drivers who were killed, also found that their play histories were very, very deficient. So that set me off on a long odyssey of studying play itself in more normal and less antisocial, violent young men, and beginning to get some sense of how does play really factor itself into the life of another person. And of course, then got some child developmentalists and specialists in early childhood development in particular to teach me a lot about the importance of early, for example, rough and tumble play as it occurs normally in the life cycle of many people, and how that is how the roots of empathy and the roots of tolerance and the roots of optimism get established by normal free play in childhood, that this is a really important component. So from 1966, a long time ago with Whitman, to the present time, I have tried to collect as many histories as possible of individuals, whether they're homicidal individuals or Nobel laureates or all of us in between, as to what the impact of their play history is on them. And one gets from that the sense that there is a tremendously important component of one's well-being and a sense of self and sense of authenticity that comes from early and continued play. So it's just a part, it's an instinctive part of all of us. One of the things that happened along the way, not too long after the Whitman situation, was that Jane Goodall published some work in the National Geographic about homicidal chimpanzees. And so I wrote her a letter and said, what about these homicidal chimpanzees, Passion and Palm? And she wrote back and said they were the poorest mothered and the least playful of any of the chimpanzees that I observed. So we then established a correspondence and a friendship. And she said to me, Stuart, you'll never learn about what animal life is like unless you see them in the wild. So that's what led to my ultimately getting a contract with the Geographic and spending a number of years part-time at their sponsorship, understanding animals at play. And that's been a huge backlog of general information that also informs us about our species and its play.
I think all of us really love seeing young animals at play, and some of the characteristics like of a couple of lion cubs playing and they're going at it, or I've got a picture in my office of some brown bears, little baby brown bears, and they're kind of like almost boxing, right. And we just love that. But tell me, what exactly is it we can learn from that as humans?
Oh, there's so much. I can think of a moment when I was on the Serengeti watching a pride of lions. And all of a sudden, two young lionesses, subadult lionesses, got up, and the National Geographic biologist that was with us said, "Oh, watch this." And I said, "Oh, they're going to get in a fight." And she said, "Oh, no." She said, "That's rough and tumble play." And I said, "What do you mean rough and tumble play?" If you'll notice, their claws are withdrawn, their hair is flat, they're having eye contact, their involvement, their movements are curvilinear. It's an entirely different language than if they were having real fights. But they're learning who's fast, who's strong, who's this, who's that. And this is a tremendous social learning process, as it is for all mammals, which was like, what do you know? It was amazing. And that rough and tumble play example is one which certainly carries over for humans.
So you mentioned that you had a playful upbringing and a playful family, and I had a couple of younger brothers as well. And that when you mentioned rough and tumble play, I can remember my brothers pounding on me because I was the older one, and I would never hurt them, but we would wrestle and things like that, and that brings back fond memories.
Well, and the social learning one does in early rough and tumble play is complicated, but it is really important. The roots of empathy, the roots of tolerance of others, the roots of consideration and community, the roots of staying friendship when there's competition and difference. All those things kind of get intermingled with good rough and tumble play.
It's amazing that, as a more of a practitioner myself, I can remember taking my brothers just to that edge where they wouldn't cry and go to mom, where I'd get spanked. but we learned that.
That's social learning. And if that's missed, as it was in the homicidal individuals I studied in Texas, if that's missed, it's a very intricate part of getting along communally with your fellow humans.
Yeah, so that kind of ties us back to when we were talking about play deprivation and possibly some of those characteristics that, folks that don't grow up and play together and learn those skills, what are some of the things that don't happen in their lives, or what's some of the negative things associated with that?
Well, when you look at a life that's been really devoid of significant play, or a series of lives, you find some generalizations. The ability to be flexible, to train for the unexpected, to have a sense of adaptability and flexibility in your life often comes in part from good rough and tumble play. But the intricacies of socialization are also evident in the animal world. If you artificially discriminate against play in a species like a highly playful species like a rat, a laboratory rat, and then you observe their brain or their socialization when they're past their developmental area for learning rough and tumble play, they're socially deficient. They don't mate. They don't know how to tell friend from foe. They can't tell aggression. Their prefrontal cortex, which manages very complex tribal rat pack relationships, is missing. So the objective signs for brain function in our social mammals, we can't do this as a study of humans, of course, it's not ethical. But when you observe the natural history of people who have had deficiency in play, you find that there are social deficiencies well into life that have, I think, ramifications for how we get along as communal people now.
That sounds like really serious stuff associated with something as fun as play. When we think about getting together and doing something fun, like, hey, let's go play. Like if we were going to go take a walk or run on the beach or something with Cookie or with one of your dogs, But so would you, when you think about play and then think about people that are not involved in play, there's this incredible void in their lives, but can they through play retrain and become more, get those good characteristics that we just described?
I think if there's horrible deprivation really early, where let's say there's an absent or psychotic parent or serious disease, sometimes those are irreversible happenings early. But most of us carry our play nature, whether we're activating or not, throughout life. So that, I can think of a former patient who had had a terribly difficult childhood and came to see me in the office and was saying, I'm depressed, I don't play, I don't do this. And I found that she liked jazz music. And so I had her get a baton and conduct in front of her stereo Coltrane, who she loved. And pretty soon her play nature was sparked. She began to get more interested in life, and she took up ballroom dancing and some other things and had a very different life. So her play nature, even though it had been suppressed early, was nonetheless encouraged and there and waiting to be activated. So the play nature is a part of all of us, waiting for the right activation to give us permission to be able to play.
That's wonderful. That gives us all great hope.
Oh yeah, and it's life transforming.
Well, I know, Stuart, in some of our conversations over the past 2 decades, that sometimes I've described this little person inside of me that is just wanting to jump out and be playful, and sometimes not in appropriate circumstances. How do you describe that? What is that?
Look, I think we all have moments of deep engagement and joy, and we're capable of that. That's part of our play nature. Whether you're a little tiny baby and you're responding to your mother's face with a smile, or whether you're in a dementia unit and you hear a song that gave you some joy and you perk up. The play nature is there from birth to death. And it's just a matter of balancing it and finding it and giving permission. I mean, what you just described, we should allow in our culture. We should allow some nonsense and some frivolity and sometimes just some sort of useful heckling to get through the day. It's part of how we're made. And when we suppress that, or when that doesn't happen, there's a kind of a smoldering depression and a different quality to our lives than when play is present.
That's just wonderful to know that even though I might sometimes feel a little strange or a little different because of this natural feeling I have to be silly, and sometimes to be silly in a very serious a situation or a set of circumstances, it's good to know. And I think that maybe we should all, accept that a little bit more and to be a little bit more playful in our serious society.
I think so. I think, an example, there was a conference that I went to this morning where they threw a beach ball around at the beginning of the conference and didn't want it to touch the ground. So everybody is banging the beach ball, and the attitude and the sounds of the audience were entirely different pre and post beach ball. That was an experience of play that set the tone for the rest of the conference. So it happens, but we don't give ourselves enough permission.
Permission to play. That's a beautiful thing. So kind of wrapping up a little bit on this whole concept of play deprivation, what do you recommend that we do and we embrace, and how do individuals embrace their natural own play nature, if you will?
Well, I think when thinking of all the many play histories and reviews that I've done, usually you ask people, what engaged you the most? What's the best memory you can find? Can you remember something that was just joyful for you, particularly when you were very small? And a lot of times it takes more than a single interview, there's an amnesia for those early experiences. But when people begin to concentrate on them and they begin to remember, oh, it was a birthday present, or it was a vacation, or it was a pet that I loved, or it was being out in nature somewhere, they find what there is in their own play nature that touched them. And when they then hook into that, and can connect it to, if they're adults, can connect it to something in their adult life, there's an improvement in the quality of life that they then experience by experiencing more play. You get play into a life that's devoid of it, and that life is transformed. Period.
Wow. Wow. I'll bet there's a lot of lonely people out there that need to hear that message.
I think you're right.
That is pretty powerful and pretty profound.